This is an Ivor Johnson Cadet 22 caliber 8-shot revolver, 2.5-inch barrel, which is operated either by just pulling the trigger or by cocking the hammer and pulling the trigger. It's not a particularly good gun. It retails at $30.95. We sell this gun basically as a sportsman's weapon, which is used as a plinking gun, as something to take into the woods that you really don't care whether it becomes worn or not. It's definitely not a target pistol. It's about the minimum in a 22 caliber weapon.
That was the kind of gun that shot Robert Kennedy this morning. It turns out over the years that the people who shoot people don't care if it's much of a gun.
This is a CBS News special report. The shooting of Robert F. Kennedy.
Good evening. I'm Harry Reasoner. CBS News is, as we have been all day, standing by for special reports from Los Angeles and Washington on the condition of Senator Robert Kennedy. It was 3:15 a.m. in New York, 12:15 in Los Angeles. Eugene McCarthy, having sort of conceded the California primary, had gone to bed. Robert Kennedy had talked to his supporters and was leaving the ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel by a service corridor. He was shot 2 or 3 times by a man who emptied an 8-shot 22 caliber revolver, wounding 5 other people. They are not in serious trouble. Senator Kennedy is. A man was grabbed at the scene 12 hours later, identified as Sirhan, 24, born in Jordan, charged, held on $250,000 bail. The charge at the moment is attempted murder. A team of doctors worked for more than 3 hours on the critical wound, a bullet in Senator Kennedy's brain. They got most of it, but the question is, what damage has been done? The medical bulletins are not cheerful. Senator Kennedy is alive, but in extremely critical condition. Here is a current report from Los Angeles by CBS News correspondent John Hart.
Hospitals, policemen, bulletins, a sign on the wall of this press room saying, "Pray for Bobby." Big-name visitors, a tough reporter walking around saying only to himself, "Hang in there," and another reporter who didn't like the sound of his own voice, pressing Frank Mankiewicz, the press secretary, on the extremely critical condition of Senator Kennedy, asking about a report that one doctor said the chances are slim, and Frank Mankiewicz refusing to be pressed. Policemen on the roofs of nearby buildings and more policemen on that 5th floor of this hospital, guarding the man who found police guards distasteful. Mrs. Kennedy, in her 3rd month of pregnancy, being assigned a gynecologist in a routine attendance. Those were some of the pieces of a day which may have ended with the doctors expressing concern for the survival of Senator Kennedy because of his failure to improve in the post-operative period, as Frank Mankiewicz put it earlier.
Of physicians attending Senator Robert Kennedy is concerned over his continuing failure to show improvement during the post-operative period. As of 5 p.m., Senator Kennedy's condition is still described as extremely critical as to life. There will be no further.
In simple form, it was a day in which the senator's aide said to a friend, "It's bad. It's real bad." The investigation of the shooting continues at Los Angeles Police Headquarters, and here is Bill Stout.
Activated especially for the case of Sirhan, the 24-year-old Jordanian, born in Jerusalem, but in a part of the city that was then a part of Jordan, lost to the Arabs after last year's Six-Day War. All the information concerning this case, all the leads and tips, all the facts and provable facts are coming in here. These people sift and evaluate. They've come up with a good deal of information, filling in the background of this fellow. First of all, that he lived in Pasadena, was educated there and in parts of Los Angeles. His family came here in 1957 from Jordan. His father returned the same year. A mother and he and 3 brothers stayed. The mother and the 2 other brothers, one now living in New York, the mother and the 2 brothers still in Pasadena moved out tonight from the family home, leaving it empty, apparently because of the publicity. Ciran could not at first be checked. He refused to talk, refused to give his name. His fingerprints did not turn up in any of the state or local or FBI files. Finally, it developed that he had once applied for a job as an exercise boy at the Hollywood Park racetrack. And for that, he had to be fingerprinted, his fingerprints filed with the state. And in checking those juvenile print files, finally, the identity was established. He was the man, it is now believed, who went to the Ambassador Hotel and carried that night a gun, which itself had an interesting history, a .22 caliber 8-shot pistol. It was traced over 3 years' time from Southern California to Northern California.
We are now going to Washington for the president, who is going to speak
to you
about
this
the Kennedy
evening not
shooting.
only as your president, but as a fellow American that's shocked and dismayed as you are by the attempt on Senator Kennedy's life. Deeply disturbed, as I know you are, by lawlessness and violence in our country, of which this tragedy is the latest spectacular example. We do not know the reasons that inspired the attack on Senator Kennedy. We know only that a brilliant career of public service has been brutally interrupted, that a young leader of uncommon energy and dedication who has served his country tirelessly and well, and whose voice and example has touched millions throughout the entire world, has been senselessly and horribly stricken. At this moment, the outcome is still in the balance. We pray to God that He will spare Robert Kennedy and will restore him to full health and vigor. We pray this for the nation's sake, for the sake of his wife and his children, his father and his mother, and in memory of his brother, our beloved late president. The Kennedy family has endured sorrow enough, and we pray that this family may be spared more anguish. Tonight, this nation faces once again the consequences of lawlessness, hatred, and unreason in its midst. It would be wrong, it would be self-deceptive to ignore the connection between that lawlessness and hatred and this act of violence. It would be just as wrong and just as self-deceptive to conclude from this act that our country itself is sick, that it's lost its balance, that it's lost its sense of direction, even its common decency. 200 million Americans did not strike down Robert Kennedy last night any more than they struck down President John F. Kennedy in 1963 or Dr. Martin Luther King in April of this year. But those awful events give us ample warning that in a climate of extremism, of disrespect for law, of contempt for the rights of others, violence may bring down the very best among us. And a nation that tolerates violence in any form cannot expect to be able to confine it to just minor outbursts. My fellow citizens, we cannot. We just must not tolerate the sway of violent men among us. We must not permit men that are filled with hatred and careless of innocent lives to dominate our streets and fill our homes with fear. We cannot sanction the appeal to violence, no matter what its cause, no matter what the grievance from which it springs. There is never, and I say never, any justification for the violence that tears at the fabric of our national life, that inspires such fear in peaceful citizens that they arm themselves with deadly weapons, that sets citizen against citizen, or group against group. A great nation can guarantee freedom for its people and the hope of progressive change only under the rule of law. So let us, for God's sake, resolve to live under the law. Let us put an end to violence and to the preaching of violence. Let the Congress pass laws to bring the insane traffic in guns to a halt, as I have appealed to them time and time again to do. That will not in itself end the violence, but reason and experience tell us that it will slow it down, that it will spare many innocent lives. Let us purge the hostility from our hearts, and let us practice moderation with our tongues. Let us begin in the aftermath of this great tragedy to find a way to reverence life, to protect it, to extend its promise to all of our people, this nation, and the people who have suffered grievously from violence and assassination. For this reason, I am appointing, with the recommendation of the leadership of the Congress, with whom I have talked this evening, a commission of most distinguished Americans to immediately examine this tragic phenomenon. They are Dr. Milton Eisenhower, the former distinguished president of Johns Hopkins University, Archbishop Terence Cook of New York, Albert Jenner of Illinois, Ambassador Patricia Harris, Mr. Eric Hoffer, Senator Philip Hart, Senator Roman Ruska, Congressman Hale Boggs, Congressman William McCullough, and Judge Leon Higginbotham. The Commission will look into the causes, the occurrence, and the control of physical violence across this nation, from assassination that is motivated by prejudice and by ideology and by politics and by insanity, to violence in our city streets and even in our homes. What in the nature of our people and the environment of our society makes possible such murder and such violence? How does it happen? What can be done to prevent assassination? What can be done to further protect public figures? What can be done to eliminate the basic causes of these aberrations? Supported by the suggestions and recommendations of criminologists, sociologists, and psychologists, all of our nation's medical and social sciences, we hope to learn why we inflict such suffering on ourselves. And I hope and pray that we can learn how to stop it. This is a sober time for our great democracy. But we are a strong and we are a resilient people who can, I hope, learn from our misfortunes, who can heal our wounds, who can build and find progress in public order. We can. We must. So I appeal to every American citizen tonight. Let us begin tonight.
President Lyndon Johnson, speaking with a good deal of passion about the shooting of Senator Robert F. Kennedy and about the problem of violence in American life, saying that it must stop and saying that he is appointing a commission to study just why we act that way. A commission that will be headed by Milton Eisenhower, the brother of General Eisenhower, and will include Archbishop Terence Cook of New York and Eric Hoffer, the longshoreman philosopher of San Francisco, and several other people, and who will try to find out if there is anything that can't be changed in the American character or the American government that leads to this kind of thing. The latest incident, the one that President Johnson talked about, began at the end of a long day yesterday in California. It turned suddenly from triumph to tragedy for Senator Kennedy after he had won the California primary. Reporter Andrew West of the Mutual Broadcasting System described the scene in the Ambassador Hotel just seconds after the shooting. West was closer than the cameras.
What happened, you know? Somebody said he'd been shot. I am right here. Rafer Johnson has a hold of a man who apparently has fired the shot. He has fired the shot. He still has the gun. The gun is pointed at me right at this moment. I hope they can get the gun out of his hand. Be very careful. Get the gun. Get the gun. Get the gun. Stay away from the gun. Stay away from the gun. His hand is frozen. Get his thumb. Get his thumb. Get his thumb. Take a hold of his thumb and break it if you have to. Get his thumb. Now lift. Get away from the barrel. Get away from the barrel, man. Look out for the gun. Okay. All right. That's it, Raper. Get it. Get the gun, Raper. Okay, now hold on to the guy. Hold on to him. Hold on to him, ladies and gentlemen. They have the gun away from the man. In this shot, they've got the gun. I can't see the man. I can't see who it is. But Senator Kennedy right now is on the ground. He has been shot. What is he? Wait a minute. Hold him. We don't want another Oswald. Hold him, Raper. We don't want another Oswald. Hold him, Raper. Keep people away from him.
Doctor, everybody, please stay back. Please stay back. We need a doctor here.
Took an elevator to the second floor. Senator Kennedy was laying on the floor, on the cement. His wife over him with an ice pack on his head. Somebody said the ambulance is here now. I stooped down to see what I could find was wrong. Mrs. Kennedy pushed me away. She says, I don't want you. I said, we were with the ambulance. We were called. What can we do? She said, let's get him to the hospital as soon as possible. I reached under Senator Kennedy's shoulders to pick him up, and I felt some blood that was dripping from his coat. He said, please don't lift me. And I immediately then placed him on the stretcher. That time, while everybody else was getting their hands into it, they were mixing us up where we couldn't do anything at all. We put him on the elevator, took him out to the ambulance. We rushed him here as fast as possible. But on the way in the ambulance, Mrs. Kennedy kept pushing me away from me. She didn't want me to touch her husband.
Did she say anything to you, or was it just physical?
She was just physical. She was upset. I could see that. Everybody else was too. But she just didn't want me to touch her husband, and when we got to the hospital, the doctor took over.
Well, when he was brought in here, he was rather pulseless, and I thought we might have to pronounce him as having expired, but he really rallied after we gave him some emergency treatment. We gave him closed cardiac massage, we gave him some adrenaline, and he began to breathe and began to develop a good heartbeat.
Doctor, in layman's language, what was the senator's condition when he left here to go to Good Samaritan?
In layman's term, the engine was running, but he was totally unconscious, no response. His sensorium was absolutely at a fixed glaze stare. I slapped him in the face several times, and Bob, you know, trying to get some recognition, nothing. But his pupils were around regular and equal, which meant at that stage of the game that he was, the brain damage had not set in to cause any modification there. And they weren't dilated, which is, with full dilatation, usually it's a sign of death.
Was Mrs. Kennedy in the room all this time?
Yes, she was.
Did she say anything? Did she do anything?
Yes, she was very, considering the circumstances, she was extremely composed. She was very gracious and very overwrought about it, of course. One of the little sidelights, I think she was afraid that he was gone, and we had to reassure her a little bit. So when I did get a heartbeat, I put the stethoscope in her ears, and she heard it, and like a mother hears her baby's heartbeat, she was just overjoyed.
All but one fragment of the bullet had been removed from the head injury. There is still one bullet apparently somewhere in the back of his neck, although this is not regarded as a major problem. Senator Kennedy lost a considerable amount of blood as a result of the bullet which entered passed through the anestoid bone on the right side of his head. And some of the fragments of the bullet and of the bone went toward the brain stem. In addition to the damage done by the bullet, there may have been an impairment of the blood supply to the midbrain, which doctors explain as controlling, or at least governing, certain of the vital signs: pulse, heart, eye tract, level of consciousness, although not directly the thinking processes. And the doctors say that the next 12 to 36 hours will be a very critical period.
As you all know, no words can really fully convey the feeling that I have toward the Kennedy family in this time of their particular tragedy, or the feeling that one must have for the nation in the face of this tragedy, this new tragedy. It's not enough, in my judgment, to say that this is the act of one deranged man. If that is the case, the nation, I think, bears too great a burden of guilt, really of a kind of neglect which has allowed the disposition of violence to grow here in our own land, and part of reflection of violence which we have visited upon the rest of the world, or at least upon a part of the world. All of us must keep vigil with the nation in prayer and hope that Senator Kennedy will recover. Meanwhile, I'm suspending indefinitely all political activities. I intend to return to Washington soon and confer there with spokesmen for Senator Kennedy, with the President, with the Vice President, and with other political leaders before making any other, taking any other political action of any kind.
You just said again that the nation shares a part of the guilt in this. What does the nation do? This is the third assassination or attempted assassination we've seen in just a few years.
Well, I think that it's a very complicated sort of thing. It's not just a political problem, but there are some things that we can do, I think, in politics that we haven't done, some things we can do about the process of campaigning, which I think what we really have got to do is begin to give somewhat more rational control to the rational attention to the problems of America. We proceed as though we were still a pioneer country, and we're not. It's become a rather complicated, sophisticated civilization, and few people, or not enough people at least, respond to that reality.
Senator Kennedy is the greatest friend that we have, and we pray that God will keep him. Because if he goes, then I don't know what's going to happen to not only Charles Evers and the Negro, but to all of the minority groups and to America, because this is the one man, I believe from my heart, that can save this country. He's the one man who's concerned about the rich, the poor, the black, the white, the Mexicans, the Indians, all of us. And he's the one man who has the dedication and the know-how to bring us together and stop this type of thing. But he's a victim of the same thing that we've been victim of all these years: hate, hate, and hate.
Mr. Evers, you have long held to nonviolence firmly in all of the difficulties that you have seen in Mississippi. Does this shake your faith?
No, John. I'm a great believer that the only way we're going to be able to ever win our freedom is that we got to stay nonviolent, because an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth won't work. That's what's wrong with America today. She's been destroying, and she's going to be destroyed unless she changes. And two wrongs won't make a right. And I think Senator Kennedy would want me to say this: whatever happens to him or whatever happened to me, but the rest of us, we got to keep on, as Dr. King said, we got to keep on the nonviolent way with love and devotion to all men, and hope and pray that someday that white America will wake up and stop destroying those who care so much for them.
The man in the middle of this picture, surrounded by a phalanx of policemen, is the suspect accused in the shooting of Senator Kennedy. a bushy-haired, swarthy, complected man who was seized in the kitchen area of the Ambassador Hotel by Rayford Johnson, who had been traveling with the senator. The suspect was booked on suspicion of assault with intent to commit murder and has refused thus far to identify himself. Fingerprints of the young, short, swarthy suspect were turned over to the FBI for a check. He was described as 25 to 28 years old with short, bushy hair. Police said the suspect was questioned about 15 minutes and appeared to understand English. However, he has thus far refused to talk except to answer yes at one point.
We have determined from fingerprints that the individual we have in custody is Sirhan Sirhan. And the reason that the prints were not located before is because they were in the juvenile files at the Department of Justice in Sacramento. We determined that some years ago, Sirhan Sirhan attended John Muir Junior High School in the city, and while attending there as a juvenile, he applied to be an exercise boy at Hollywood Park and had to have his prints taken. What I have now is the set of fingerprints that identified Sirhan Sirhan, and it shows the date of birth as being March 18, 1944. So then he's 24, not 23. And
Jerusalem, Jordan.
Jerusalem, Jordan?
Yes.
Thank you.
Does it show when he came to this country?
No, this is just the prints. It shows nothing else.
Chief, would you be good enough to trace the gun again for us, please?
Yes, the gun went from an elderly man in Altadena to his, an elderly man in Alhambra, to his son-in-law in Marin County. The wife of the son-in-law, the daughter of the elderly man, gave it to an 18-year-old boy who in turn sold it to a fellow named Joe from Pasadena with bushy hair who worked in a department store. And the Joe turned out to be Joe Sirhan, and the gun turned out to be the gun that Sirhan had last night.
The news of the shooting spread fast, and world reaction, as expected, was one of shock and horror. President Johnson was awakened in minutes after the event and told about it. CBS News correspondent Dan Rather now reports from Washington.
Harry, there's a late development here at the White House. President Johnson made an address to the nation broadcast during this program a few minutes earlier, and now the White House press photographers have been called back into the fish room and told to stand by. We have no idea what that is about, but they have been told to stand by for possibly another presidential broadcast appearance. In his earlier speech made this evening, a few minutes ago, President Johnson came out four square for passage of a gun control legislation. He has consistently supported such a bill. He made it clear that he still does. Earlier in the day, the bill's author, Connecticut's Democratic Senator Thomas Dodd, urgently called for its revival.
We ought to require that every gun be registered with the law enforcement people of this country. Now, this isn't very much. We register our motor vehicles, we register our dogs, we do a lot of things. And if there's any thing in the world that is causing death and the commission of crime, it's firearms.
The gun control proposal, along with other items, including safe streets, is in the House at the present time. I would say this incident will be something of an inspiration to get quick action on it. And then if we've got to modify the gun law in other respects, it can be done, and we could even do it before this session runs out.
Many people put too much stock in the notion that if you pass a law, you'd handle the gun problem. I am sure that the County of Los Angeles and the city have very rigid regulations with respect to the carrying and the possession of handguns. And you can pass all the laws you want, but unless you outlaw the manufacture of weapons, you're going to have some nut with a gun, and you can't outlaw him.
5,600 gun murders last year in the United States. In Great Britain, they had less than 30. Belgium, less than 12. France, I think, less than 20. It's insane. And, of course, you talk about the old pioneer day and this, that, and the other, but we don't live in the old pioneer day where everybody's a vigilante and you shoot them up. I think we've got to come to our senses.
Guns were to be the target of the Poor People's Campaign, too, as they planned to mount a massive demonstration against the National Rifle Association. But that turned instead into a prayer service for Senator Kennedy. Campaign leader Reverend Ralph David Abernathy led the service, attended by hundreds.
If we must follow after Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the 4 little children in the 16th Street Baptist Church, Mrs. Viola Laudzo, Jimmy Lee Jackson, and all of the martyrs who've gone on before, then we pray that thou will give him peace somewhere.
Prayers were mixed with a certain bitterness also as Hosea Williams decried a nation's sickness.
Our country is a very sad state during this period of history, and I think this decade probably will be known as the decade of assassinations. Assassinating those that speak out for justice and against injustices probably will become a fad.
Also in Washington today, Mrs. Martin Luther King, interviewed by CBS News correspondent Daniel Shore.
How did you react when you heard of the shooting of Senator Kennedy?
I immediately composed a telegram to send to Mrs. Kennedy, which I'd like to read for you.
Please.
I am praying for your husband, whom I so much respect, and I am praying for our country in this period of great national tragedy and peril. You, your husband, and your entire family have been most comforting to my family in our times of grief and difficulty. And I am prepared to do anything which may be of some service or consolation to you now. Sincerely, Mrs. Martin Luther King, Jr.
There obviously hasn't been time for a reply to that telegram.
No. I am now leaving to go to Los Angeles to be at Mrs. Kennedy's side.
Mrs. King's concern about America's dilemma was shared in the United States Congress.
President Kennedy, Dr. King, and now Robert Kennedy, why are we such a sick people? Why does this go on? And ask the question if whether, when there's formal cultural approval of violence, we don't just encourage these kind of emotionally troubled people to decide that they can use violence too, whether it's a limited war or capital punishment. If a society is formally putting medals on those who engage in violence, isn't this really the thing that we've got to attempt to eliminate?
So first, we cannot and should not stand for defiance of the law. It applies everywhere, that statement does. Because ours is a government of laws, and where law breaks down, tyranny starts.
There seems to be a feeling in the minds of a few that they have a right to destroy authority, using the great word freedom as an excuse or as a right, whereas really we all know that when you destroy authority, you don't have freedom, you have anarchy. And if there's one thing you don't have when anarchy rules, it's freedom.
It's getting so that it is almost impossible for a politician running for an extremely high office like the presidency to go around the country anymore, to show himself to the people, and to be assured that he will be able to get his message across in safety. And I think it's about time that this country faces up to its responsibilities, goes into this particular question, and if possible, try and do something about it.
With a lot of sick people in the country, it's obvious that the environmental situation plays a very important role, and I think there has been, in recent years, too much of a portrayal of violence. It incites sick people to do violent acts. I don't know anything about the background of this man. We don't have that information yet, but I can't help but feel that he's a sick man.
And late today, the Kennedy children came home to Washington. 6 of Senator Robert Kennedy's 10 children had been with him in California. They were flown back late today aboard a government plane. Among those escorting them back, astronaut and Mrs. John Glenn. With the Kennedy children, one of the family's dogs, Freckles, also came home. Late word from the White House press office is that the call a few moments ago for photographers to re-enter the fish room was on a contingency basis, the contingency being that President Johnson may want to make another broadcast appearance this evening. Dan Rather, CBS News, the White House.
Robert Kennedy was shot in the head. Now, this is an injury that can be as immediately fatal as any, or sometimes you can get up and walk away. With us is Dr. J. Lawrence Poole, professor of neurosurgery at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center, a former colleague of Dr. Henry Cuneo, who was a member of the operating team today, which would seem to make Dr. Poole as qualified as any medical man who was not there to talk about Senator Kennedy's case. Also here, Earl Ubell, science editor of WCBS TV in New York. Dr. Poole, recognizing that you weren't there, and this is an improper request to make of a surgeon, can you give us an estimate from this distance of what Senator Kennedy's chances are?
Well, from what I hear, I'm afraid they're poor because of the fact that he is, as I understand it, he has not regained consciousness yet, which one would certainly hope for by this time. One would certainly hope for some glimmer of restoration of consciousness, and I gather this has not happened. So I would regard this as a bad sign.
Dr. Poole, if he should regain consciousness, how long would his recovery take, and what could you expect of his faculties after that?
Well, I would think the longer a person is unconscious after a severe injury of this sort, the longer the recovery period as a general rule. There are exceptions, so that I would think it would be a long time for an ultimate recovery.
A long time?
I would think so.
Does it have to do with the part of the brain that was damaged? I understand he was damaged in the middle of his brain.
Yes, this makes a great deal of difference. In this vital area, as I understand it, in the depths of the brain, where the main cable from brain to the rest of the body was injured, this is the most serious area that could be damaged.
I have a picture of the brain which might help us to see it. This is the picture, a side view of the brain. The skull is on the outside, of course, and the nose is over here. Where is the area that you're talking about, the midbrain?
Well, the midbrain is right in the middle, in this area right here.
And what does that control?
That is the main cable from the brain itself to the rest of the body down to the spinal cord, and it controls the motion of the arms and legs, the face, the eye movements, and also has a great deal to do with the state of consciousness, and in addition to that has a great deal to do with the vital signs, meaning the signs of life, the heart rate, the breathing, and the blood pressure.
Now, as you understand it, the blood was pressing in on this area and destroying nerve after nerve. Is that what was happening?
As I understand it, there was a blood clot from the hemorrhage caused by the bullet, or the bone fragments driven in from the skull by the bullet. And the hemorrhage was in the location of the cerebellum, the balance part of the brain. And this could also press on the midbrain. In addition to that, the circulation of the midbrain was injured by a torn artery caused by the bullet.
Well, how long could he stay comatose, unconscious, and still be alive?
This could be a matter of weeks. He could stay alive and yet in a state of coma for a matter of weeks and still possibly recover.
When you say recover, would he recover his full faculties?
The longer a person is unconscious or in coma, the less the chance of a recovery of full faculty. So this I would be very fearful of whether he would ever recover full faculties.
In your experience, do people recover their full faculties after such a damage, such as you understand it?
Occasionally this does happen. It is usually a miracle if it does happen.
And you don't think there will be at this time a miracle?
I cannot say. There certainly could be.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for what must necessarily be a long-distance appraisal and what certainly must involve a number of miracles if it's going to come out all right. Today's events, the tragic shooting, followed a year of surprising events in the political world. things that nobody expected in 1967, just a year ago. Many of the things that have happened this year, violent and nonviolent, were beyond normal speculation. That was when CBS News correspondent Roger Mudd spoke to Senator Kennedy about the future of the Democratic Party and the future of the junior senator from New York. Mudd first asked him if the new frontier years were as golden as the chroniclers made them appear.
Well, I think they were productive, and I think that I think that we began something, and that it was in the executive branch of the government, and then I think it caught a spirit within the United States, which is extremely important. I think it stimulated interest in government and public affairs, and again, one's responsibility to one's neighbor and to one's fellow citizen, which was extremely important. I think there have been exaggerations about the accomplishments. But I think if just doing some of these things, affecting and stimulating the spirit of this country, and I think President Kennedy did that.
When you travel, Senator, so many Americans turn out to see you because you do represent to them your late brother and what he stood for.
My last name happens to be Kennedy, so there's more focus of attention on me. I think that there are a lot of people who were involved during that period of time, not just in the administration, but the people who were in the Peace Corps in Peru or in Tanzania or Asia, which represent that period of time as well or better than I can.
In the public prints, people are not surprised by, they think there is always an ulterior motive in what you do. Is that...
Is that what?
Is that accurate?
No.
No.
What did you think I was going to say?
Is this something now that's gotten started and you can't do anything to stop it? The public image that you have?
I don't know.
How did it get started?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
The McCarthy thing and the Hoffa thing and the 60 campaign?
I suppose I've been in positions in which... But I don't know exactly. I don't know.
What's your opinion of the quality of the United States Senate? Do you think generally the quality...
Very high. You know, there are some that perhaps my respect for is less, but as a body and as a group of individuals, I think very, very highly of them. If you compare them to any other group of individuals, profession across the United States, I think they match or are superior to any other group in the country. At times frustrating, the fact that you can't get more done, and you find there are matters that really require immediate attention, emergency matters, and that you feel strongly that the country or an area of the country would be better off, or a group of people or part of our society would have better lives if we took a particular course of action, and to see it go on day after day, and that's frustrating. If you're in the executive branch of the government, or a governor, I expect, or the executive branch of the government here in Washington, it's much more possible to take an action and see some results from it immediately. That's not possible in the United States Senate, so I think that part of it is frustrating.
Just watching the Senate in action, it's occurred to me that senators have one characteristic in common, and that's vanity. Is that an accurate observation?
Well, somebody once said about the fact, you know, in the Senate presiding officer is called the president. And when somebody says, Mr. President, 100 pairs of eyes look up. So, I don't know. I suppose if everybody in politics and you're up in front of crowds, and then to some extent, you begin to think that what you say is important and significant. And because people clap at the beginning, when you stand up, people clap at the beginning, they clap at the end.
How do you like the Senate, Senator, as a place to work? Is the atmosphere comfortable?
Yes, I like being where I was before under the circumstances in which I was there, and I like being where I am now under the circumstances that exist at the moment.
Senator, do you think the Democratic Party is in trouble in 1968?
I think it could be in trouble, but I think it depends first who the Republican candidate will be, candidate for the Republican Party nationally, and secondly, whether the war in Vietnam is going on and what the status of that war might be.
But I take it that Vietnam will be the chief cutting issue in '68.
The country will hold the Democratic Party responsible for the war. Perhaps it's not going to be a matter that's be widely debated between the presidential candidates because it depends on what position the Republican take, but I think it'll be in back of people's minds. And I think that in many ways that it'll create problems for the Democrats because there are people who think we should be doing more, bombing more, taking more military action. There are those that think that we should be doing less, but they're combined together and feeling that what we're doing is not right. And that's a difficult burden for the president and the Democratic Party to carry.
Do you think about running for president? Does it occur to you?
Well, I suppose it occurs to every little boy. They told
but you're
their
not
mother
a little
that
boy anymore.
that they can be president of the United States. More seriously, I suppose that the fact that it's written about and talked about, something that goes through my mind. As far as making any plans to run, or making a decision that I will run, or knowing that at some future time in the history of the United States I'm going to run for president, I don't. I mean, quite frankly, I don't. Just because I don't think that you can plan for the future at all. So I don't do it.
Well, of course, everybody has that, everybody knows that it'll all come to an end, but you can't plan your life that way.
Well,
you have to assume. You do?
Yeah.
You have to assume that you'll go on, I guess.
Well, I don't mean, I'm not being morbid about it. Yeah. I just think that to do, and especially if you're in politics or you're in the Senate or in the position that I am, and to say that I'm going to vote in a particular issue, or that I'm going to run for president of the United States, so that therefore I'm going to govern myself in 1967 with my votes and my speeches and my public positions on the basis of whether that's going to make me popular or unpopular 5 or 6 years from now. I think it's unsatisfactory for me. It's an unhappy state to be in because it's unnatural. It's unfair to those that I represent in the state of New York, and I don't think meeting my responsibility. Now, I don't know what's going to happen 5 or 6 years from now, and I will adjust to it at that period of time. And I think that really should be accepted.
Mrs. John F. Kennedy heard the news of today's shooting of Senator Robert Kennedy in an early morning phone call from London after she had been last night at a victory celebration in New York for his victory in the California primary. She immediately arranged to fly to California. She has now arrived at Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, and we will go there for a report from CBS News correspondent Terry Drinkwater.
She came from New York in an executive jet plane. She arrived at Los Angeles International Airport just shortly after 7 tonight Pacific time. With her, close friends, both of President Kennedy's family and of Senator Kennedy, and her brother-in-law, Prince Radziwill. Jacqueline Kennedy wearing a dark brown coat and dark glasses. The wife of the late President Kennedy received word in the middle of the night last night that Senator Kennedy had been wounded. She decided early this morning to come to Los Angeles. From the airport, she was scheduled to go directly to Good Samaritan Hospital to wait like everyone else. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Perhaps because of the many tragedies in his own family, Robert Kennedy has always reacted deeply to other tragedies. He spoke in Indianapolis after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible You can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land with an effort to understand, compassion, and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times.
3 times in the last 4.5 years, national figures have been struck down by acts of violence, and every day there are continuing acts of violence. Some make the headlines, and many go unnoticed. Sitting in a studio of WHDH in Boston is Dr. John P. Spiegel, a psychiatrist and director of the Lemberg Study of Violence at Brandeis University. Dr. Spiegel, is there a particular American kind of violence?
Well, the features of violence in America are different than in many other countries. I think, though, we have to be careful not to speak of violence in a global way. We too frequently consider all violence as one thing, and that raises an image of our country of a sort of a monster where violence is concerned. Actually, if one considers the forms of violence, there are at least 3 types that we have to consider in order to determine just exactly how bad the situation is in our country. For example, there is collective violence, the sort of thing that happens in rioting in the streets or on college campuses, which involve large crowds of people and which are spontaneous in nature. Then there is individual violence, acts of violence carried out by individuals, and there are 2 forms of this sort of violence. One is attempts on the life of public figures of the tragic nature of the act which we're considering today. And the second is the sort of crime in the street, that is mugging and assault and battery and so forth. Now, the reason for distinguishing these 3 forms of violence is that they differ in rates of frequency. For example, the rate of collective violence, of rioting in the streets and so forth, in our country, compared with most other countries in the world, is quite low, despite the fact that we've gotten a lot of attention throughout the world because of our civil disorders. Nevertheless, in terms of the number of people killed and injured, the rates of violence in this area are low. On the other hand, acts of individual violence, both assassinations, attempts on the life of public figures, and crime in the streets are quite high compared with other countries. So it's important to realize that we're not violent in every direction. We have to concern ourselves particularly with the causes and the ways of preventing, of course, all 3 types of violence, but particularly acts of individual violence, and particularly in the area of assassination.
That's what we've been talking about, and you heard the president tonight name a commission. Is that the thing to do about? What can we do about this kind of violence?
Well, a commission to look into the causes of attempts on the life of public figures, of course, is important because we have really paid no attention to this matter in the past, despite the fact that it's not a new phenomenon. If one considers merely the presidents of the United States and begins with President Lincoln, there have been 20 presidents in office since the assassination of Lincoln. Of these 20 presidents, 4 have been killed, and an attempt on the life of 2 others has been made. That means 6 out of the 20, almost 1/3.
We have a problem.
This is a very, very high rate, and we have paid practically no attention to it. So there's every reason for us to look into the problem as carefully as we can.
Thank you, Dr. Spiegel. In Washington, CBS News national correspondent Eric Sevareid has also been considering the question of violence in the United States.
A very old and wise woman in Washington who knows the world of power once remarked that there has not been a family like the Kennedy family since the Bonapartes. She meant in terms of their drive and fearlessness, their single-mindedness and cohesion. But it is a star-crossed family, and this generation, like the audience to a remorselessly unfolding Greek drama, has watched transfixed and helpless as these extraordinary young men, reaching for the power and the glory, have been cut down one by one by one. Such events psychologically disorient a whole nation. There is no logic, no dignity involved. It is as if a line of battleships were sunk without trace by invisible anonymous fish. The most powerful leader is at the mercy of any single fanatical or feeble mind, as whole sections of great cities can be burned to the ground by a dozen mindless adolescents with gasoline-filled bottles. There is a sense of familiar safeguards as well as standard values giving way. The whole panoply of the state, with its police and armies and organized intelligence, appears as a prehistoric mastodon, slow of foot, dull of vision, as a Gulliver made helpless by Lilliputians. No one here has the heart right now to think about politics, but there is one thing. Whoever may win the Democratic Party nomination now will hold a tarnished medal. What everyone is trying to think about, besides the man and his family, is whether ours is a star-crossed nation. All that seems sure is that we have entered another period of violence in our collective life. The unfortunate conjunction of a savage war devoid of glory with the Negro Revolution is partly responsible for this, but only partly, for the phenomenon of violence is present throughout the Western world. We are no longer the open frontier America, as Senator McCarthy observed today, and we must consider new ways to ensure the safety of our institutions as well as personal lives. These events may well herald the ultimate end of the age of permissiveness, of organized leniency, of the equation of freedom with personal or political license. For we live today not on the frontier, but in a crowded theater. It has always been a crime to set a fire in a crowded theater, and the right of free speech does not encompass the right to shout fire in a crowded theater. It will be very important to see if the teaching of a generation can be redirected and the young taught to spell the word duties before they learn the word rights. Of necessity, the former precedes the latter in the lexicon of freedom. This is Eric Sevareid in Washington.
And this is how we stand at the moment. Senator Robert Kennedy is still alive in extremely critical condition in Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, with no immediate new medical bulletins expected. President Johnson addressed the nation within the hour, speaking with a good deal of passion about this latest event in the violence that Eric Sevareid was talking about. He is appointing a commission to be headed by Dr. Milton Eisenhower to inquire into what it is in our American nature that produces this kind of thing. A 24-year-old man, identified as now living in Pasadena, but having been born in Jordan, in Jerusalem, named Sirhan, has been arraigned in Los Angeles as the suspect in the case. He's held under $250,000 bail. We have learned that violence is a problem in America, and that this is not necessarily the last incident of it. In the meantime, Senator Kennedy lies in the hospital. It is likely we will all be thinking of him tonight. This is Harry Reasoner, CBS News, New York.
This has been a special report from CBS News. The shooting of Robert F. Kennedy. CBS News will return to the air immediately as developments warrant. Further statements may come from President Johnson at the White House and spokesmen for the Kennedy family in Los Angeles, where Senator Kennedy's condition remains extremely critical. This is CBS.